Aloha kako. Thank, thank you for inviting me today to talk about some of my research from University of Hawaii that I did for my PhD on grasses. So my goals for this talk are to go from prehistory to the modern day, talk about what grasses are in Hawaii, how they got here, and the sort of ecological things that we can infer from that. And please raise hands, ask questions during the talk. I don't really want to monologue this whole time. So we'll start with the pre-contact grasses. There are approximately 50 grasses. There's 48 that we currently have names for. There were probably more historically. They arrived via about 20 colonists, and so there's a few diversifications of them, but a lot of them didn't really change. It's just one colonist and one species. There's a bunch of indigenous grasses, and then there's two main kind of radiations of grasses. The ones on screen are the ka kona kona, or kona kona is the genus Panicum, and they're for the most part fuzzy species, either annual or perennial. And then the second radiation is the Kavelu and relatives, which is Aragrostis. The English name for those is love grasses. There's about 9 of those, and those are the most diverse native group of grasses in Hawaii. So most of these grasses arrived in Hawaii via birds, is the hypothesis. So the one on the left is Kamano, which is a relative of the prickly grass you get at the beach, the sunbur, or whatever you want to call it. And it also has the prickly hairs that will attach to birds or your genes. And that is kind of the stickiest grass seed that's native to Hawaii. But then a lot of other grasses have these bristles that come from the seeds that have tiny little barbs on them, like pili. And so those will embed in feathers and can get transferred here via birds. And there's a few that might have blown over, but birds are hypothesized to be the main way that grasses got here historically. So ecologically, what we know about grasses, which is in a pre-contact sense, which is not too much because the landscape was changed so immensely, but most of the species were perennial. Some of the panicums, like the ka kona kona, were annual and would grow in dry areas near the coast and then would pop up every winter and then die. But the Aragrostis were probably one of the most significant at a landscape scale. The Kavelu and relatives, and then pili as well, is also a really major landscape grass in pre-contact times. They were not hypothesized to be ecosystem dominant like they are now. They would have been mixed in with woody plants in shrublands and understory in forest. And then there would have been just a few grass-dominated systems, mostly at higher elevations, is the hypothesis. And then along with most other native plants, the populations of native grasses have gone down over time due to the imported species that are really competitive. And the amount of grasses has changed over time with the glacial cycles, because there's bog pollen cores that we've dug around the islands in various spots. You can see the amount of grass pollen go up and down, and it kind of correlates with the cooling and warming of the glacial cycles over the past 50,000 years or so. So then, moving on to Hawaiian canoe plant grasses, there are two grasses that are definitely canoe plant species. Coal, or sugarcane, is one of the most important. Has a lot of medicinal uses for sweetening medicine, mixing with other things, compounding. There's other resources that go into that more. And then the leaves were sometimes used for thatch. I've read mostly for upland structures where there's not as much pili available. And then ko is also basically sterile. It won't make a significant amount of seed, so it has to be propagated by man. So anywhere that you find sugarcane, it was planted by somebody. There are a few places that are named whose name references ko, like Koloa on Kauai, and Kuoko on this island, are referencing this grass, with Puako referring to its flowers and Koloa referring to long ko, I guess. And then the second canoe plant grass is ʻOhe, where the bamboo. Walked past a big one when everybody came in. So this is a clump-forming bamboo, not the running bamboos that you'll sometimes see in the forest. It's associated with Kane, and so you get places like Kane ʻOhe, which is referring to a groves of bamboo. There are some really famous ones on the Hamakua and Hilo side of the island, because this grass likes windward areas for the most part. So there's some famous groves over there, and like ko, it's also sterile, and so everywhere you see it, somebody planted it. So this one had a number of uses as well. The ʻOhe kapapala, used for printing on kapa, so you would carve into a piece of ʻOhe, a split ʻOhe, and then press it onto your kapa to make prints. And then it was also used for the sharp blade for circumcision. And then the frame for holua sleds for racing downhill is made out of ʻOhe. The puʻili for hula that you shake, those are made out of split stems of ʻOhe as well. So pili grass was not a canoe plant, but it was extensively cultivated and managed by Hawaiians for thatch, for hale pili. So it was the preferred grass for the houses. And so Hawaiians would use fire to manage populations, to encourage fresh growth, and to keep out other species. So it would burn areas, and the pili grass would survive without much difficulty, and other species wouldn't.
I have a late question. What part of the ʻOhe was used for the blade, for the circumcision?
You would split the stem, and it would be the outside layer of it. There's a sharp, the very outside. So you would split it on an angle, and it forms a really sharp knife. We can go get some from the collection later and try and demonstrate not the making the knife. I mean, making the knife. How sharp it is.
Look, you have that. Pili grass, was it used in other Pacific Islands? Like, could they have brought that pili grass technology with them?
It definitely could have been, but pili grass occurs basically everywhere in the tropics. So the hypothesis is that it arrived here naturally. It could have also been brought as a canoe plant. There's no way to know for sure. And with the pollen, you can't identify grass pollen to species. So you can't. There's no way to know for certain. But with how widespread this grass is, being in basically every tropical country, it's assumed that it got here naturally. Bye. And then there's this kukai pua'a is another grass, a crabgrass that was used by the Hawaiians to help with lacerations, probably other uses that aren't recorded. And this might have been brought over accidentally as a canoe plant, like as a weed or as an unintentional canoe plant, or it could have been here naturally. It's not entirely clear. It doesn't have as many uses as other canoe plants, and it's the only kind of weedy grass, so it's kind of ambiguous. So then, based on that same pollen core evidence, we think that grass abundance increased during the Polynesian period, likely due to grass's disturbance adaptation. So with clearing land and fire and other agricultural practices, grasses probably were quite happy in that environment, and so there was a big peak in how much grass pollen was deposited in those cores over the past 1,000 years or so. So then moving to the post-European contact era, sugarcane is obviously the most important grass for the history of Hawaii in terms of that era. Its story is already well told, and I am going to skip over it entirely and focus on other less well documented grasses. So then for these grasses, their history kind of starts with the introduction of cattle to Hawaii, which was in 1793 by Captain Vancouver. He brought cattle to this island, and then quickly they moved to the other islands as well. And because they really quite like to eat grass, many species were brought over to feed them, and as accidental introductions with hay for both cattle and horses. So in the 1850s or so, the ranches started to proliferate. So before that era, cattle were controlled by the ʻAliʻi. So they would say who gets to harvest these cattle, and so they were all managed by those ʻAliʻi. So there wasn't an economic motive for Europeans to start doing anything to feed them with what sort of grasses they eat. So they were mostly feeding on native vegetation and whatever weeds were imported by that time. But after the mahele and land became available for Westerners to own, people started fencing and then started importing grasses so they could have more productive cattle pastures. So this is John Palmer Parker on the right, who started the first ranch in Hawaii on this island. And I'm not sure if he was directly involved or if it was his descendants who started importing grasses, but Parker Ranch had definitely their hands on importing European forage grasses. So those were mostly at higher elevations, so like above 3,000 feet or so. And they imported the European grasses at that time because the tropical species weren't economically available. There were seed sellers from Europe and North America you could buy these things from, but there was nobody in Africa or Australia selling tropical seeds at that point. So there were about 30 or so forage grasses that were imported before the 1900s. Most of those were cool season grasses that grew higher upslope. So come the territorial period and the illegal overthrow of the Hawaiian monarchy, the federal government formed the Hawaiʻi Agricultural Experiment Station, HAES. This was partially formed to take down sugar because the federal government didn't like how much power the sugar companies had in Hawaii, so they wanted to empower small landholders to start selling more produce and have more economic power and try and erode at these sugar companies. So this was quite a colonial venture to import all of these species to try and improve the agriculture in an area rather than working with the species that are already available and had been used for thousands of years to bring in new ones that are more suitable to the Western styles of cultivation. And so they imported all sorts of stuff. They imported thousands of species of grasses and papayas and macadamia nuts and pineapples. What else? Different breeding programs with tomatoes and eggplant, and they had their hands on every corner of agriculture that wasn't sugarcane, effectively. And they published a lot of this, which I was able to use for this research. So they imported about 1,800 accessions of grasses, consisting of 260 or so species of grasses, effectively all of these for pasture use. They didn't do anything with ornamental grasses at that time. So a lot of these ended up naturalizing and became important pasture species. So kikuyu, buffalo, California grass, pangola grass were all Hawaiʻi Agricultural Experiment Station grasses that were brought in by them. Guinea grass was probably brought in before that time. It was one of the few warm season grasses that was brought in the before 1900. So this picture is from the 50th anniversary of the Hawaiʻi Agricultural Experiment Station. They had this, I don't know how to describe it, all of their successes over the years. And so they started in 1901 when the station was founded, that papaya varieties available gave little yield, and the station solo papaya made the industry possible. At the bottom left, we have a hapu'u ʻOhe forest that says much of Hawaii's land was wasted when the station started in 1901. And of course, powered clearing equipment turned wasteland into pasture land. So this is the philosophy of this organization in the 1950s, and presumably before that period too, with why they were importing these grasses and other organisms. So it all connects back to ecological imperialism of trying to dominate an area through the plants and animals that are in this area, to colonize the area, to use these plants and animals and disease to control the land and control the people and modify the ecology to fit the economic goals, which is, I'd say, the exact opposite of the Hawaiian way of thinking of modifying the economic goals to fit the ecology. And so importing grasses was one of the main ways they did that, to allow economic production on these marginal lands where you couldn't grow row crops or anything. The soil was too rocky, but you could fill it up with imported grasses and cattle, and then you could export that cattle or sell it to whalers or whoever, and make that land productive in this sense. So that played out with about 240 grasses that stuck from all of those introductions that naturalized across the landscape by forming populations that self-sustain. So Maui has the most grasses, but between Maui, Oahu, and Hawaii Island, they're all kind of neck and neck. And I think if more research was done on this island, it would probably take the cake for most introduced grass diversity, since there's a lot of areas, there's a lot of pasture land controlled by ranches that haven't been botanically surveyed in a long time, which probably have new species that haven't been recorded. So as of 2020, when I started my research on grasses, the flora of Hawaii, the grass flora, was quite understudied. It was quite, there weren't many people doing field work looking at what grass is and where they are. So I started going around the islands doing roadside surveys. So I would drive and stop every couple miles at a pullout and see what grasses are growing there. And through doing this and looking at museum collections of grasses, I found about 55 new grasses for the entire state of Hawaii. So a lot of botanists don't like grasses because they are tricky to identify. And so that plays into why they're understudied. But I think that's part of the main reason, is that people are intimidated by grasses. And so they are like, oh, it's a grass, and just keep walking. But they are the most ecologically important family of plants in Hawaii by any metric, I'd say. So they needed more love. And with the expanding on that a bit more, with the herbarium research I did in the museum, the Bishop Museum has the largest museum collection of dried plants anywhere in the Pacific. So people will go into the field and they'll press plants and then label them with where they came from. It's effectively like pressing flowers. And there are about 10,000 grasses that are stored in the herbarium at the Bishop Museum. So I went through just about all of those, and I was looking for things that had been misidentified or things which were just identified as grass, or they just identified it at the genus level, and went through those and found many new records too, where things were already here, but people were misidentifying them or not identifying them. So there are a number of species that have been here for. There's one that was here for 100 years and had been misidentified the whole time because of confusion, I think, with the taxonomic literature that was available at the time, and with the internet age, there's a lot more of that is way more readily accessible than it was in 1990 when they'd been doing a lot of the research for the Manual of Flowering Plants. Some of the identifications were hard enough that I had to use genotyping and actually sequence the grasses because they were so similar that you couldn't tell based on morphology. There was one from Europe, one from Asia that looked basically similar, that looked really similar, but with DNA you can tell which is which. So some of them were really cryptic misidentifications. Of those, 12 were reported for the first time outside of their native range. So Hawaii is truly, by any metric, a hotspot of invasive species where things are coming in from every corner of the world and becoming invasive here, where they've never been invasive before. So where the Hawaii gets to be the petri dish of all of these species and see how they perform outside of their native range, which is kind of terrifying, I'd say. And then some of the grasses were deleted from the checklist due to being misidentification. So with that one species, there was the European one and the Asian one. They were both on the checklist. They were the same thing. It ended up being the Asian one. So I deleted the European one off of the checklist. And there are a few other things where it was confusion. And about 200 things that had spread between islands that I had found during this research, which is there's about 1,000 total species island records, where if one species is found on 5 islands, it counts as 5 records, and so that was about 20% expansion in where we know that these grasses grow. So in terms of the importations, it ended up being about 600 species that I could find references to in the literature that were introduced since European contact, which is about 5% of all grasses in the world. In Australia, it was about 20% of all grasses, so it could be worse, I guess. But it's still an incredible amount of the grass diversity was trialed here by the experiment station, and a whole lot of that they wanted to succeed and it didn't for various reasons, with climate not matching or infertility or whatnot, or disease. And then this chart shows the number of importations over time. So many of these didn't succeed, but starting through the 1800s, it was very few, about 20 or so species that were imported, and then it shoots up during the experiment station era. This is just the number of grasses, I think, that naturalized, because it only goes up to 300. So it's not all of the introductions. But then after the experiment station era, in about 1950, the experiment station folded into the University of Hawaii and became CTAR, one of the parts of CTAR. And so at that point, I'm not entirely sure what changed as to why they stopped trialing new grasses, if they had less reason to, if the grasses that they already had were successful enough that there was no more demand from ranchers for new species, or if there were other administrative reasons they stopped importing grasses. But by about the 1950s, it was started transitioning to ornamental introductions at that point, and the forage introductions were different varieties of species that were already here rather than new grasses entirely. So like the mulatto grass and other hybrids they started importing at that time, which were already, for the most part, here. So of these 578 species, 420 of them were deliberate for forage or grain species or ornamentals, and 158 were accidentally brought here, which is a process of elimination for me, where I couldn't find any record of how it got here. Then it kind of became an accidental until proven otherwise. 92 of those grasses are bamboos. So there's a lot of those species here. Most of the bamboos did not naturalize because they have a slower life cycle, I think is the main reason. And given a few hundred years, I think some of those will start making seed and we'll see them escaping. But for now, the bamboo introductions are largely sterile in that sense. But of the non-bamboos, about a quarter of them succeeded in naturalizing and forming populations across the islands. So breaking that down again in a different way into pathways. So among the deliberate introductions, the majority of those are forage. So on the right is like narrow-leaf carpet grass, which was a early forage species, which you can find it at higher elevations for the most part. That was a forage species that has become very successful at naturalizing. And then the rest were largely ornamentals, with the bamboos being the dominant group of those. We didn't have as many ornamentals as other regions of the world where grasses became an important kind of plant in the nursery trade. There were fewer of those in Hawaii. I'm not entirely sure why that never developed, if it was restrictions on importation, or there was less people going at it. But there were plenty of people importing bamboos, but they didn't import other ornamental grasses that look nice in flower beds for whatever reason. But among the accidentals, most of them we don't know, because the first records of these accidentals were found were recorded in the herbarium record as a specimen, and it would just say roadside hilo or something like that. And by the time it's found reproducing on the landscape, it's already impossible to know how it got here. Among the few that we do, hay is the recorded importation way for about 4 grasses. I expect that number is dramatically higher than 4. I think that is probably the main way that these accidental grasses got in, because there was never a local hay industry in Hawaii. So before the automobile came along, everybody had their horse and they imported hay from California or Australia or New Zealand, and that had seeds from who knows what in it. Then it would go through the horse and get pooped out. The seeds would germinate, and then you'd have a new grass. It was only recorded for 4 though, but I found one newspaper article which talks about in the 1930s there were 30 million pounds of hay that were imported by the U.S. Army on Oahu to feed all of their draft animals. So if that was just the Army, I don't even know how much hay was imported from other people for other animals, for their horses and mules and so on. A lot of it was wheat hay from California. So they would plant a field of wheat and then cut it, dry it into hay. But then I'm sure there were other producers selling hay that harvested wild grasses, or that hay was contaminated, that the wheat was also mixed with other grasses that were growing wild in the in the field, and they arrived here in that way. There are a few that arrived as seed contaminants with either other grasses or other species entirely. There was one recorded for packing material, which was hilo grass. I think I might have a slide on it later, but it was imported by Reverend Mr. Lyman in Hilo with a box of crockery from Cape Horn that had evidently been packed with this grass as a padding material, and then you just throw the grass out, and Hilo grass arrived, and apparently his horses liked it, so he kept it, and it spread all over the Pacific at that point. Pretty sure Hawaiʻi was the first spot to receive that grass outside of its native range. And then nowadays there are a bunch of species that are moving through the horticulture trade with being mixed in with soil of live plants that I've found. I imagine that number is also higher because of those 6, I think I found about half of them. So there's definitely more that arrived before my day that have been spread. As far as where these grasses came from, the Afrotropic region has the most grasses that were deliberately introduced as black bar. So the African pastures have the African savannas have a lot of very grazing, resilient species that were brought over, like guinea grass, kikuyu grass, California grass, are all African species. And then as far as accidentals, the Indo-Malay, which is basically East and South Asia through Indonesia, is the largest region for accidental importations. I guess with trade routes and immigration is my hypothesis for that. A decent number from Australasia, mostly Australia and Papua New Guinea and Aotearoa. Very few grasses came from Oceania, which is interesting. And my hypothesis there is that many of the weedy, kind of disturbance adapted species that would have been brought over accidentally had already dispersed naturally to Hawaiʻi, and also the Pacific region doesn't really have many ungulates, many animals which would have grazed on them. So the species here are not as desirable forage grasses. So there would be no effort to seek those grasses out. The near Arctic is North America, basically from Mexico northern Mexico north. And that is a surprisingly small amount considering the economic connections between Hawaiʻi and North America. And there's a lot of grasslands in the Midwest. So I'm not sure why a lot of these grasses failed when they were trialed in Hawaiʻi. But they certainly tried. They imported a lot of grasses from the Great Plains and the Rocky Mountains here, but a lot of them didn't end up succeeding. Yeah.
So it's some of these naturalized grasses, and they've been not so long grabs, but maybe long enough. Are you seeing any significant divergent in traits of these areas that they originally came from within the species?
I haven't looked at that specifically to see if there's changes in morphology, or there's definitely changes in ecology because of the novel climates and everything that are here. But as far as evolving to fit Hawaii's climate, that would be an interesting project to do for sure. One thing that I can say is that some of these imported grasses are hybridizing, where there's species that don't overlap in their ranges naturally, but in Hawaiʻi they do, and so they hybridize. There's the species of windmill grass, chloris, that is hybridizing here, at least on Oahu. It's hybridizing, and it's forming what appears to be a sterile hybrid for now. Sometimes these sterile hybrids can unsterilize themselves. But on this island, there's the kikuyu fountain grass hybrid, which is a really strange one. There's the Kikuyu is the only fertile is the like an outcrossing of the two. So fountain grass is a triploid, which means its DNA is not how most organisms are. Like most plants and animals are diploid or tetraploid, where they have an even number of chromosomes they can sexually reproduce. Fountain grass cannot do that, but it can make pollen, which can fertilize the Kikuyu grass, and so you get a sterile hybrid between the two. There's a name for it that ranchers have. I'm blanking on it now. I've heard people call it hybrid fountain grass. There's another name too. I think it starts with a K. But that's one of the novel grass evolutions that's occurring. So as far as introductions of grasses, they are not slowing down over time. There have been 30 naturalizations in the past 26 years. I imagine a bunch of these could be pushed back further, but the first recorded evidence is in the past 30 years. A bunch of these were ones that I found on the side of the road. Who knows how long they were there before I found them. But these species are continuing to spread through our leaky biosecurity, or perhaps weak biosecurity, and getting into the islands. Many of them I found in association with horticulture, with the importation of plants, some of these weedy species that can make seed quick and then spread into adjacent pots and eventually escape the nurseries. And we really need to increase biosecurity in Hawaii because having 30 new grasses in the past 26 years is really not sustainable as far as our ecosystems go, because that's 30 new weeds that people have to manage, and that's not even including all the other non-grass species that are coming in as well. With all of the species that are spreading into Hawaii, we get around 14 new plants every year that are either coming in accidentally or escaping ornamentals or escaping forestry trees. 14 every single year for the past, that's the average since I think 1990, which is a truly incredible amount of species. Should not be getting in here. So the outcomes of this is that grasses now occupy 20 to 40% of the landscape, depending on how exactly you estimate it from satellite imagery. And most of that ends up being grass-dominated ecosystems. Effectively, every habitat you go in Hawaii, you can find an introduced grass, because so many of these areas have had cattle run through them and spread these seeds. So even pretty untouched areas on the slopes of Mauna Loa had cattle or goats spreading grass seeds through them. So just about everywhere you go, you can find a non-native grass. And then they obviously displace native species, promote fire, and there's a lot of management work that needs to be done to figure out how to work these giant fields of fountain grass and buffalo grass that are burning every few years, in terms of either biocontrols or how we stock animals to graze them so that they aren't as flammable. There's a lot of work that needs to be done to figure out that. So why are these grasses so successful ecologically in Hawaii? So one of the big traits that grasses have is the ability to do what's called C4 photosynthesis. So these are what are called warm season grasses. They mostly grow in lowland areas, and they have a mechanism to increase the carbon dioxide concentration in the cell and make their photosynthesis more efficient. Because as you increase temperature, photosynthesis generally gets less efficient. So they have a mechanism to undo that. So most plants like lehua trees and papayas and basically all broadleaf plants use C3 photosynthesis, which is less efficient in the hot lowland areas. But these grasses are not doing that. So they have that immediate metabolic efficiency where they can acquire carbon more quickly, grow more quickly. But then when you get up above 4,000 feet, there's also C4 grasses, or C3 grasses, sorry, that use the cool season pathway, which is the same as most other plants in the world. So then they are on a more even playing field. So as you go up and down slope, you get those different adaptations, and grasses will use all of them. And then grasses are wind pollinated, of course, and so that reduces the amount. You don't have to have a specialist pollinator like you do, like a lot of other plants do. They just let the wind do that work, which basically removes the pollination limitations. And then with the number of animals that are in Hawaii, goats and cattle and sheep and deer, these grasses are very effectively able to grow under those conditions because their roots and buds are buried under the ground. So they can be eaten by a goat all the way flush to the soil, and then as soon as rain comes, they'll be right up again. Whereas a lot of other plants, if they were to receive that same treatment, they would die. And then those underground roots also give drought adaptations, which is obviously very important for much of the leeward sides of the islands, where they can die all the way back to their roots, and the growth point is underground, it's protected, and then as soon as they pop up, as soon as there's rain, and then the fire adaptations are one of the more important ones. So the grass fire cycle is what kind of is a term for promoting how these grasses promote themselves across a landscape. So we start at the top. We have a grassland that's encroaching on a forest. The grassland eventually burns from whatever reason, probably a human-caused ignition. And then the grasses on the edge of the forest carry the fire into that forest. The trees usually are not successful in recovering from that fire. Koa trees will recover pretty well. Ali'i will as too. But lehua usually does not make it, and most other native plants are not particularly adapted to fires. They will die out after that fire, or at least start regenerating from seed. But at that point, there's been that flush of ash and sunlight. All of these nutrients come into the ecosystem, and there's already these grass seeds here from the previous generation of sparser grasses growing underneath the trees, and they're poised to take that flush of ash and sunlight and then immediately grow and generally outcompete the tree seedlings and regenerating trees. And they will encroach into the forest. It will turn it from a grassland to a forest, and it'll just continue to erode with every successive fire into the forest. And that will create a giant grassland where there used to be forest. So this map shows all of the fires over the past 30 or so years in Hawaii, with the number of fires making the color lighter. So over here in Waimea, there's been a fair number of fires along the highway. Leeward West Maui has the area that's burned 6 times in the past 30 years. Western Oahu, Leeward Moloka'i, the Waimea area, Kekaha area on Kauai has burned. And this has ultimately given Hawaii more density of fires, like percentage of area burned. We have a higher percentage area burned in fires than California, than these western states, because of the proportional size of everything that we just have.
Can you hear those grass fires or all fires?
This is all fires, but most of them are grasses as the main fuel. Yeah. That's the outcome of 100 years of grass importations willy-nilly, is incredible amounts of wildfire. So this is a shameless self-promotion slide for my website, mountwu.net, which has pictures and maps of every grass that occurs in Hawaii, both natives and not. So the QR code is for that. And this is an example of one of the maps I have for this grass called bicornis grass, which is mostly puna, ka'u side grass. But there's a bunch of suitable habitat for it in Kona. It hasn't made it out here yet as far as I'm aware. But this is just an example of what's available there. And then I have a few random slides on grasses. This is the bicornis grass that was in that last picture. This is a species of broom sedge is what people often call it, or beard grass is another name. This is a grass that a lot of people misidentify. It's an incredibly invasive species that started proliferating. Oh, the beer. That started proliferating in the 90s or so, probably as an accidental introduction, and it's spread all over Kauai and the Puna side of this island, and it forms really dense thickets of highly flammable grasses because these leaves are stiff and V-shaped like fountain grass. They hold up and dry and burn very well. And this is one to just keep your eye out for on Kona side, because as far as I know, it's not here yet, and maybe we can stop its spread if it were to get here and have it like Myconia, where it isn't yet on this side of the island. And at that point, I think we're at the end of the talk. So I wanted to thank a few people, my UH advisor, Kurt Daler, some Bishop Museum people, Barb Kennedy, Claddy Mata, Tim Gallagher, as well as Tim Flynn and Kyle Austin for all their help with this project in the field and in the herbarium. And then I got funding for this work through the USGS PICASC program, which has now been defunded. But all of this work is courtesy of USGS.
PICASC
Is gone. It's gone.
That's what we used to want Stemmerman's name up there.
Yes. Yeah, and Lonnie Stemmerman is a UH grant that I used for the DNA sequencing part of this project. Yeah.
Oh, great. I had one question.
Okay.
So for the kukai, where would you see that growing? And how much I walked over it and not realize it was like he would.
Do you have Wi-Fi in the house? I can pull up my grass website on this computer if there's. Is there Wi-Fi?
Remote 5G.
Oh, it is. Oh, it's connected. Okay.
It's sort of feel like I've not been paying much attention except to Peely over the last 20 years. So I want to know what I'm walking past and not realizing. And it was.
The Chili.
This is Spanish.
I'm trying. Oh, it's not uppercase. So it is this grass. So it has, It's a kind of hairy grass. It grows about 2 feet tall. Its flowers are all kind of held together, erect, like usually stiffly upright. So there'll be like 10 branches that all kind of look like a broom, I guess.
Huh.
So it's a crabgrass. You can kind of see some little hairs on the leaves here. There is a lot of it in Puna. There's some populations around here, so I imagine you can find it on the side of the road somewhere around Kona.
But look coming on the side of the road. Just okay to grass.
It's a pretty weedy species.
But they totally belch. Yeah.
Yeah. So then that's most of the other crabgrasses have the branches all diverging in different directions. So that's the thing to look for, is a kind of sprawling, hairy grass with stiffly erect inflorescence branches.
This is an amazing tool. Thanks for sharing the QR code.
Yeah. Yeah, you could have some around the garden. I would not be surprised if it's like lurking in a corner somewhere.
That's out with my grass survey.
Yeah.
Well, that seems like questions. Thank you so much for this, which was super interesting. Being around you based at home.
Cool.
Yeah, I mean, 90%.
Well, good.
Yeah.
Well, the grass that was planted here originally, and was kind of dominant out there, I think, is that pastel and whites. I think it's called tropical walnut. You know about that grass at all?
I've heard about it. I haven't seen the Hiranai one before. I remember reading about it, but I've never actually seen it.
Oh.
So I'm curious about that one. I haven't looked around the grounds very much yet as far as the grasses. I was looking at some of the trees earlier, but I can maybe answer that question later.
I was wondering, how widespread it was. It's the story came with it was developed in Hawaii for rehabilitation of pastures. And
Yeah, I remember reading about that one when I was doing my research, and then I ended up thinking that it was a different name, that it was like a cultivar of a different grass at the Hiranai, or how do you say its name?
I think it was like
Hiranamai, that it was that name applied to something else, and it wasn't like actually that grass that was planted in Hawaii, that it was a misidentification. I would have to double check my notes though as to what I ended up finding for that one.
I guess should they go eat in the nest up for sections down, and then we'll go out? Well, this is kind of a detour, but when you said about all the hay that people reported to feed put livestock, the beginning of the story, one time a long time ago, my teacher's husband told this whole story about a song he wrote, and it was about him that every year in the 50s or 60s, he would come from Hilo with his family over to some relatives at Holdham now and stay with them for a while. And every day, he said, the kids' job, apparently among their relatives, someone had a house down at the beach, someone had a house somewhat up in the area. And the kids' job was to walk with the donkeys, but with all the perishable food like butter and stuff. And load it on the donkeys and walk the donkeys up to the other relative's house I don't know if they had a refrigerator or it was just cooler there. And then every evening for dinner, their job was to walk the donkey back together with perishable food. And that made me western. Did lots of families have like one donkey they use as a pack animal, and did they feed it hay, or then they just try to graze it on whatever was around?
I imagine that depended a lot on the geography. Like if you were somewhere that had large amounts of land, that there was just wild grass, that you would use that. And if you're in Honolulu and Waikiki or Chinatown, there's not really any of that around, so you would be importing grasses more. So I think there's probably an inverse correlation with like ruralness as far as grass availability. But a lot of people would also cut grass too, so they would go upslope and cut grass, bring it into like bind it into not bales, but like slings or whatever, and then haul it down slope to where to where the animals were. Yeah, because more moisture upslope and everything, and easier to bring the grass sometimes than the animals.
Yeah.
So I found one story in a newspaper where somebody was fined for cutting elephant grass in a forest reserve, and the government was not happy about that, so they fined him.
Wow.
So, I knew an old farmer who said that if he grew up in middle A and their coffee land was up coming above the house, but they would keep some guinea grass crawling down by the house because they take the donkeys up there and then load them up during the day, and then they could just turn it loose because they know the guinea grass would go right back to the.
It's clever, yeah.
Yeah.
Hey,
Oh, Joe.
it's so cool. Actually, you probably don't have an answer. It's probably one of those somebody's the researcher answers. But are you seeing any adaptation in native grasses to fire or grazing?
There's a few grasses that can tolerate fire pretty nice. The pili, obviously, and then there's this grass called Hawaiʻi, which has been showing up at some burn sites on Maui, on East Maui above Lahaina, and then there's up on Mauna Loa, Mauna Kea. There's some upland relatives of Kavelu and of Kakonakona that are fire adapted. So if you go on Old Saddle Road, there's a giant stand of Eragrostis atropioides, which is a Kavelu relative, and that has deep underground rhizomes, like several inches deep, and it forms really big clumps. And I was there a few years ago after a burn. The ground was all still charred. That grass was popping up and flowering. It was quite tolerant of that fire, and probably growing back a little bit better because of it. So there's quite a few grasses that are native grasses that are still adapted to fire. They probably were adapted to fire before any sort of environmental change happened in Hawaii, just with their life cycle, their lifestyle of having those deep rhizomes. But there's quite a few species.
Are there any larger scale sources of seed for native grasses?
That's something that I've heard people are working on it. There's the USDA Plant Materials Center at Ho'olehua on Molokai. I believe they have some production capacity for pili grass. That's the main one I know off the top of my head. I think there's a lot of room for improvement in that, like availability of grasses. It's not a developed industry at this point. As with like most other native seeds, it's something that we haven't really worked on yet in Hawaii.
Are there any native grasses that are being introduced into the landscape industry or as ornamentals?
I've seen pili grass used the most. I haven't really seen anybody use Kavelu or its relatives. I think that would be a really good one, though, especially the atropioides type, because it has those super deep rhizomes, and it can grow in some pretty crazy like substrates. So I think that one needs a lot more development in the ornamental industry. But I haven't seen any of the panicums in horticulture. Most of the lowland ones are annuals, so they wouldn't be great because you'd have to replant them every year. And then a lot of the like pretty clump forming grasses are largely higher elevation species that they do great in a garden like Volcano or like Kula, but around here I think it's a little too hot for them to do well, which is unfortunate.
Right.
Seeing this, we can have it by to 8 or to 7